Hello everyone, this is Steven here, and I'm going to give a basic guide on how to play Solar Warfare and how to use the program. So let's start with the panels which you have in the program. There's the control panel and the map. I hope to have a third panel which will give you information on your empire and which will give catalogs of the stuff you can build, but right now I don't have that. I'll warn you, by the way, that I'm going to have to split up this video into several different guides because the software I'm using to record it only allows 15 minutes, and this is a complicated game. But it also gives some insight on what I'm doing with my mouse, so by putting various colors around it, so that's nice. Anyway, the control panel. There are 3 buttons here. There's the end turn button, which, of course, only works when it's your turn. And it ends your turn saying, I'm done, this is what I want. There's the exit button, which closes the program. If you have to close the program, always use the exit button, because there is a special cycle that it has to go through to exit the program, to close down the program. And if this cycle is disrupted by, say, closing it from Task Manager or from a hard shutdown of your computer, if that happens, then I'll have to do some hacking to fix it, because everything will be messed up. The third button is direct keyboard. For some reason, we don't know why, occasionally the program stops responding to your keyboard commands, and I don't know how to fix that, so instead I just patched it by using this button to force the program to respond to your keyboard commands. The third thing here is just a marker of telling you whose turn it is right now, or if we're waiting for someone else to start his turn. Eventually, there's also going to be a messaging system. This will either be right here on the control panel, or it'll be in a separate program. We're not quite finished with it, so we don't know yet. So that's the control panel, and when we get a information panel, you won't be interacting with it at all, it'll just be giving you information. So, the map. And let's start with resources. In the map, you can drag it around to get a different view of different parts of the world, just by holding the left mouse button. Or you can zoom out, or you can zoom back in. Zooming out and zooming in slows the program down for various reasons. The third thing you can do to change your view is you can just click the scroll wheel, instead of turning it, and that'll reset it to its default settings, the center of the map, the standard zoom, etc. So that is very basically just how you look around the map. You'll see that we have, on every planet, a good amount of detail. We can see any ships or units that might be there in this zone. We can see resources there in this zone. We can see buildings on a planet in this zone. And we can see who controls it right here. And if you want to get more detail about a planet or about a space, you just right-click the insignia. You can actually right-click anywhere on a planet, but the problem is that right-clicks are also interpreted as a command to scroll through what's there. I can right-click on the resources here or on the buildings to scroll through them. So you just need to right-click somewhere that's not a building or that's not a ship or whatever. So the other feature about the map and about how to view information is what's called filters. When you hover your mouse over a ship, it lights up various parts of the map, showing where the ship can move, or when you're trying to move resources, it lights up where they can move. Filters generally just give you information, and you'll see them popping up all the time throughout this guide. So, let's start talking about how to play this game. Let's start with resources. Resources are produced on planets every turn. Let's use Festex as our example. You can see that there are 4 types of resources. Green is silicon, blue is titanium, yellow is gold, and red is fuel. Each of these resources has various purposes and various specialties. Fuel is best at producing missiles. Gold is best at boosting your economy. Titanium is best at producing the big ships. And silicon is best at producing the little ships. So, how are resources produced? Well, at the beginning of your turn, every single one of your planets produces according to its production, which you can see in these numbers here, 0, 2, 3, and 1, and according to its buildings. So here's how this works. Each refinery that you have, there's just one refinery for each type of resource: titanium refinery, gold refinery, and fuel refinery on Festex. Each one of those refineries produces a resource if it can. Now, what I mean by if it can is that it's constrained by the production of a planet. So take Festex and take its fuel refinery right here. Every turn, that fuel refinery will produce one fuel. But if Festex had an additional fuel refinery, it wouldn't produce anything. It would still just produce the one fuel because it only has one fuel production. However, it has a 3 in gold production, so if we had 3 gold refineries on Festex, every single one of them would produce a gold every turn. So that's how resources are produced. Now, resources are transferred either in ships or in trade routes. So trade routes are made up of planets, like Festex, Serel, Vermont, Sidon, and Treven. They're made up of trade blocks, these little insignias on empty spaces, which just shows there is a trade block here, and ships. Now, these come together to make a trade route through which you can teleport and transfer resources free of any charge. Let me show you what I mean by selecting the resources on Festex. You will see that a filter appears all around my empire showing where I can move resources. It's all connected by these trade routes and by these ships, so I can move it wherever I want. I can move it to Harner, I can move it over here, I can move it over to Treban, I can move it all the way down to June, or I can move it to my trade ship. Wherever you want, over and over again. Now that they're at my trade ship, I can move my trade ship. I'll talk about ships later, but to move them, you simply select them and select all the resources you want to move them. I select my trade ship, a filter appears showing where it can move, and I move over here. Trade ships are a little confusing, and I'll talk about that message later. Now, another thing you'll see me use often in this guide is the Control-Z function, just to undo something which I didn't actually want to do when I was using it as a demonstration. So I'll use Control-Z right now. The other two useful keyboard functions are Control-R and Control-D. Control-R looks around your trade routes and summons everything that it can to the place where your mouse is currently. In this case, to Festex. Control-R, there everything goes. Not missiles, because missiles, well, they can be transported around trade routes, as you can see by this filter down here. Well, they can be transported that way. They are too important, I think, to be messed around by a hotkey like that. The other hotkey, Control-D, disperses your resource around the world. It doesn't really matter how, it just does it to try and make things easier for everyone. So, that's how resources are moved. Now, resources are used to build things. To build rockets, to build ships, and to build buildings. Let's start with rockets on Treban. I'm using Control-R. So, a rocket silo, or rocket factory, basically, all you need to do is click the button. If you have enough resources, which I do, look at how rich I am, if you have the resources, clicking the button will just make a missile appear there. So, as you can see, if I produce this, I cannot produce a second time, even though I have plenty of resources. And the reason for this is that buildings can only be activated once unless you use a general, but we'll talk about generals later. Ship building. You can see here a list of the things I can build. I select what I want to build, and I click Build, and voila, it appears. Now, I should warn you that both ships and buildings, when they are first produced, don't do anything. You have to wait a turn for them to be useful. So let's next talk about how to build buildings. You can only have 3 buildings on a planet at any one time. So Javaha, which only has 2, I'll build there. You can see down here that, just like in ships, a window appears telling me where I can build. So, telling me what I can build, sorry. So I can build space station, rocket silo, fuel refinery, gold refinery, titanium refinery, silicon refinery. I'm just going to build myself another gold refinery. I click purchase building, and boom, I'm almost out of resources. Okay, but I don't actually want to be almost out of resources, so I'm going to undo all that, if you don't mind. There, all of my resources back. So now let's talk a little bit about buildings. There are 8 types. There's the 4 refineries, which produce stuff. There's the rocket silo, or missile factory, which produces missiles. There's the space station, which produces ships. There's the resource depot, which honestly is completely useless. Don't use it. And there's the trade center. So let's talk a little bit about trade centers. Trade centers are incredibly useful. I have one right here at Apex. First thing trade centers can do is they can let you, once per turn, they can only be activated once, of course, trade 3 or 2 of some type of resource for 1 of something else. So I'm going to trade 2 fuel for a gold here. Click the trade button, and boom, my gold goes up by 1, my fuel goes down by 2. Now, the other thing which trade centers do is they produce these ships. You have one of these ships associated with a trade center. These are called merchant ships, and basically they are just used for transferring resources around. Now, the third thing that trade centers do is they help cover your trade block limit. So now I think we'll talk about those trade ships, which I said I would talk about earlier, and we'll also talk about resource storage. So the way trade ships work is they can produce these trade blocks. So if I select this ship and this trade ship, and I move it over here, type yes or no to drop a trade block. Yes, there's my trade block. That's how you produce them. Now you can only have a set amount of trade blocks every turn. In this case, I think it said 23. Yeah, 23. So if you exceed that trade block limit, you'll have to remove a trade block. And that's bad, because you want a functioning trade system. So your trade limit is dependent on, first of all, the number of planets you have. Each planet you own increases your trade limit by 1. But secondly, it depends on the number of these trade centers you have. Each trade center you have increases your trade limit by 2. So the fact that trade centers give both that and this merchant ship over here means that with a trade center, you get a total of 3 blocks. So trade centers are what you want to build a trade route. Okay. And trade routes can be destroyed too, but we'll get to that in a little bit. The final thing I want to talk about is those resource limits I talked about earlier. So you can see on all sorts of things 2 numbers, a green number and a brown number. These are the storage, and the green number refers to your basic resource storage, silicon, titanium, fuel, gold, and the brown number refers to your special resource storage. Now the way this works is that at the end of your turn, all of your ships and all of your planets can hold a certain number of resources. And you count up the total number of resources on that area, and if you have more resources, then there is storage, and some of those resources get randomly discarded. Fortunately, Control D prioritizes where it distributes resources based on where you have storage, so Control D is nice. Note, I repeat, that the storage for missiles is separate from the storage for normal resources, so don't make that mistake. Generally speaking, you should have plenty of storage, and you shouldn't have to worry about losing resources, but occasionally it comes up, especially in the middle of war. Similarly, your ships can only move a certain number of resources if, for some crazy reason, I tried to have this trade ship carry around more than 12 resources, let me show you that right there, then I'm not allowed to move because it can't carry that much.